Hello friends, welcome to Agile Digest. This is Niladri Mahapatra and today we'll talk about sprint burndown chart. This is actually somewhat a controversial topic. Many people believes they don't need burndown chart. Many people says they prefer to do burndown chart on story points. Few says they prefer to do burndown chart on hours, on the task hours. So today we'll talk about mainly on the sprint burndown chart, why it is important and how we can prepare it. Mostly we'll be targeting on the task hours and what is the disadvantage if you do your sprint burndown chart on hours. So quickly look into the topics what we'll be covering in today's this tutorial. First we'll try to learn about what is a sprint burndown chart, and then we'll talk about how sprint burndown charts gets generated and what exactly it represents. Then we'll talk about how to read burndown chart. Then we'll talk about few scenarios when we'll refer our burndown chart and what exactly the cause is and what's the decision we can take from there. And we'll talk about the team performance from burndown chart and defined action items. We'll show a couple of different states of burndown chart and what exactly that cause and what is the action items to improve from there. And then finally we'll touch something on the burndown chart, what exactly the disadvantage if we do it through story points. The scope will be covering on mainly the sprint burndown. There can be many burndown charts you can actually use to track your remaining hours or remaining amount of works. There can be a release burndown, there can be a epic burndown, there can be a feature burndown. Today we'll talk about the sprint burndown chart, what exactly it is. So let's begin. So what is sprint burndown chart? It's actually a visual representation of remaining amount of work for any specific sprint at Scrum team level. So what does that means is if you have a Scrum team and your Scrum duration is 10 days, 2 weeks sprint, then in those particular area at any given point of date within the sprint you can actually gauge how many total hours of work or how many total amount of works is remaining. So we'll talk about few other areas. For an example, what is the purpose of this burndown chart? So we track the remaining amount of work, then referred on. So when we actually refer this burndown chart, you should refer at least once a day. So every time I suggest to refer it after your daily Scrum call, quickly when all the team members is present at one location, refer it and do the action items or prepare the action items based on your findings. And who is actually referred by or who owns this burndown chart? That's a Scrum team. And the Scrum team means the product owner, developer, tester, anyone who is a part of the construction of the sprint and the Scrum master, those belongs to a Scrum team and everyone owns it. It's not an individual chart. It's not owned by your senior management or managers to track how you are progressing. It is your chart to work on a self-organized way. You can decide how you are progressing, what are the action items you need to do. So it's very much for the Scrum team only. What it represents the real-time amount of work pending for the sprint of any team. So whenever you are referring, it should represent total amount of work remaining for that sprint at that given point of time. Now we'll talk about what is a life of a burndown chart. Burndown charts take birth at the time of sprint starting and it's actually closed at the time of sprint closure. So it's very much a lifetime of a sprint duration. Measurement units, it has actually two axes, x-axis and y-axis. The x-axis is the amount of days of that sprint. We'll look into that in much details. And the y-axis is your amount of work. So x-axis, the horizontally you can see at the bottom of the chart the total number of days for the sprint, and the y-axis you can say the total amount of works. It can be hours, it can be story points. I personally prefer hours. We'll explain why. Now let's talk about how a burndown chart gets generated. So let's assume you have this backlog, and if at the beginning of every sprint you will be having a sprint planning meeting, and once you are having the sprint planning meeting, you will be getting a sprint backlog. So your sprint backlog have a scope. You have selected for an example these many user stories, and that's your sprint backlog. You have a sprint definition that is starting on, for let's say 10th of December and ending on 21st of December. It's a 2-week sprint, total 10 working days. Now once you have started your sprint, or you actually committed, not yet started, I always prefer to have a task breakdown, estimate the task into hours and assign into individual resource. So for an example, this is your task distributions looks like. So there are 5-member team, everyone says I will be working on 5 hours for this story, this person will be working on 3 hours for this story, and this person will be working on 4 hours for this story. So similarly, everyone have break down their stories into multiple tasks. These tasks can be for development, this can be for testing, this can be test case creation. After that, you will get a total number of hours for that particular sprint. So the total number of works required for this sprint, or estimated for this sprint, is 110 hours. So burndown charts actually start from your estimation, how much you have estimated. Actual we'll see on the day-to-day basis, but this is the starting point. You got 10 days here for the sprint duration and 110 hours for the total sprint commitment estimation. Now let's see how the burndown chart gets prepared from these two values. So if we look into this particular picture, we see, okay, we have the total number of hours, that is the amount of work on the left hand side, or the y-axis, and the x-axis you will be having all the days, day 1, day 2, day 3. So if your sprint is starting on 10th of December, it will be ending on 21st of December. In burndown chart, there are one line first prepared, that is called ideal line. So how does the ideal line calculates is, so let's assume total hours is 110 and there are 10 working days. So each day 11 hours of work has to be completed. So if 11 hours needs to be completed, at end of the day 1, how much it needs to be there? So it will be 110 minus 11 equal to 99, and similarly at the end of the day 2 it should be 88, at the end of the day 3 it will be 77, and so on. So if you plot a line between all these remaining hours, this yellow color box is the remaining hours, and rest of them I am just showing here for the explaining this particular calculation. And now you see your ideal line is this gray one. It's actually crossing between all the ideal remaining hours. This is all the predicted value, it's not the actual one. This is a prediction, and based on the prediction the ideal lines looks like this. Now if it is the ideal line, how the actual line will be plotted. So let's see, if we start plotting on the day 1, how much amount of works someone have worked on. So for an example, the entire team have worked on some hours. At the end of day 1, their remaining hours is 105. So what that means is they have worked for 5 hours. At the end of day 1, they have 105 hours of work remaining. Now at the end of day 2, they have, so this is just as random values that I have picked in to make you understand what exactly this burndown chart plot, how it is plotting. And then again at the end of day 3 you have 98 hours of remaining, means you have worked only 1 hour for the entire day. So this is how every day at the end of your sprint day, if you are using any ALM tool or Excel anywhere, you need to just enter the value in Excel, or if you are using any ALM tool, that ALM tool will do it for you. You just need to update your remaining hours. If you are working in Rally, if you are working in Jira, probably you can log your hours. In that way you will be updating it. And now the actual line will be looks like this at the end of day 3. So if today is 12th December, you are referring your burndown, it will be looks like this. You will not be able to see these circles. These circles are just to show you the value, but you will just see this blue line, or it will not be a blue, it will be red or gray, whatever the color is, but the actual line will be something a different color from your ideal line, and you will be able to see this is not a symmetrical or plain line. And similarly, at the end of day 6 you can see something like this, and at the end of last day you will be able to see something like this. So this is your actual lines, whatever the actual hours remaining at the end of the day based on whatever the team has updated on their remaining tasks. So every day they are updating their task remaining hours, or they are logging some hours. That ALM tool is calculating the remaining hours based on that, and it's calculating for you. So this is how your burndown charts calculate. Now there is one more aspect of capacity line. What exactly the capacity line is, this is what we have calculated based on how much you have committed, but you had a capacity of 130 hours for the entire team. So we can actually use another line. Many ALM tool does not provide, TFS provide this capacity line, but this is a very useful ideal line on the capacity of your team. So what does that mean? We'll talk about that in later, because this capacity line is actually says, so if at the end of day 2 even it is above gray line, that means you are actually not burning your hours based on the prediction, but when you are not in risk because you are within your capacity. We'll talk about this capacity line much details in upcoming slides. So let's just try to understand. This is how your burndown chart looks like when you have your capacity line, where you have 130 hours of capacity, you committed 110 hours, 10 days of sprint, and how it will be looks like. Now let's talk about once your chart is prepared at the end of the sprint. I don't have those blocks or circles now. This is how your burndown chart will be looks like. The green one is the capacity one, this gray one is your ideal line, and this red one is your actual line. So at any given point of time, if this point here, this is actually very risky area, and if you are within this gray, this is a safe zone. We'll talk about different scenarios in burndown chart. What does that mean if the actual line is above the capacity line, or in between capacity line and ideal line, or within ideal line, and what are the action items we need to take about. So now let's talk about the different cases the sprint burndown. So here this is one of the case where you can see at the end of day 4 your actual line is ending somewhere here. So it's actually risky because it's above the gray line. Every time if your actual line is ending below the ideal line, it's safe. If it is ending above the ideal line, it's risky, but the amount of risk is depend how far it is. If you look into this area, so this box is actually representing how risky it is, because if this situation happens between mid of the sprint or beginning of the sprint, it's not that risky. If you have this kind of situation at the end of the sprint, that's becomes more risky because you don't have much time to recover that loss. This is because we have some loss and we were unable to follow the predicted ideal burndown chart. We are not updating or working on our work that is actually planned for. There is another situation over here. This is actually very risky because this is, if you see, it's on the day 6 and the line is pretty high from the ideal line, and the amount of risk is, if you look into the size of this box, this is the amount of risk. So if you will go towards remaining days of the sprint is lower, the amount of risk will be higher. So here this is risk. In this situation, you ideally should talk with your product owner that there may be some reasons. The reasons like you are not updating your remaining hours on your ALM tool, or there are some. So here, if you see, every day it has to be going down or on the straight line. It moves up means there is some scope creep happens, some new stories or tasks created. So you need to create your task at the very beginning before you start your sprint, so that we can have the ideal line properly. If you forget to create the task, you will be not able to map your capacity, and later you may go above your capacity. So the commitment needs to be within your capacity, so that I always suggest create all the tasks that you think you will be working on at the beginning of the sprint, and update your remaining hours on daily basis so that you can get a proper status or tracks on everyday basis. Right. So here you can actually take your decisions. You find out why exactly this is happened. There may be some stories got blocked, and because of that you are unable to burning your stories. Because of those block, you may have added few more additional tasks. There can be many reasons, but here it needs you to look into what exactly happening and why this risk is appearing here. There is one more situation here. It's perfectly normal. The burn down actual line is coming close to parallel with your ideal line. It's on day 6, so it's nothing to worry about. There is no risk as of now. Now we'll talk about one more situation where we can see our burn down chart on day 4, the actual line is above the actual line, but if you actually have the options of capacity line, you can actually see, okay, even it is outside your ideal line, but it is within your capacity, so you can still able to recover. The same thing you will not be able to recover if this line goes above the capacity line like this. If it's crossed the capacity line, now it's very hard to reach because you don't have that much capacity at this point of day. So at the day 6, you have the capacity of somewhere these 60 hours, where your remaining hours is close to 75 hours. So you will not be able to complete 75 hours of work within your capacity of 65 hours. Ideal line plots based on whatever you have committed. If you have a capacity line, you can get a better visibility in case your line is above the ideal line, but how risky it is. Okay, let's talk about scenarios when we refer our burn down chart to take decisions. So there may be different scenarios happens, different situation comes in, and few of them I'll talk about. There are many scenarios that we need to refer our burn down chart. Number one, let's talk about this scenario. The product owner asked to add one user story, as it is on high priority and the functionality of the story is very critical to deliver by the sprint end. So product owner identify there is something very high critical functionality needs to be deployed, and that has to be done within that sprint. So normally this is not a very good practice, but situation happens in real life situation when product owner came up because product owner understand the business better than the team, and product owner have rights to ask for any new stories or new functionalities if the team can take in. So what you can do is, so if your burn down is like this, you can definitely able to see the team can straightway agree to the story additions of the current sprint, because if you have lots of bandwidth available here, you already have completed whatever you estimated and you are below the ideal line, you can definitely accept that. Only thing you need to keep in mind, the skill level individual remaining work. So what happen is, what exactly that means is each team member works on particular skills. So what Agile says is all the technical team members should be in a similar technical team level, but that's not the ideal scenario when we work on a real life projects. So there are some sets of people who works on development, some sets of people who does the testing, some set of developer who works on one particular language, another is only doing BI works, another is doing only ETL work. So there are varieties of skill sets. So even if it is done, we need to see what are the skill set required by the new stories that is product owner is asking for, and whether that skill sets resource have available bandwidth or not, because this is a team average burn down chart. So it may be possible that its need, for an example, it needs some Java work and the resource who work for Java work doesn't have bandwidth. This is because the testing team or some other team, they have worked aggressively, and the average the team burn down is looks here. So that is one area you need to see. But this is ideal cases. Normally in this scenario, based on my experience, we are in a good position to accept a new story. But if you are like this, it's actually not very risky, but we are still have to see that, okay, this is we are above the ideal line, close to the capacity line. If we add one more story, it may be not very good idea, but if it is a business critical user story, it has to go, then we can request our product owner that he can identify some low priority story that is committed, and we can descope that if we have not started working on it. So that is the cases you can actually accommodate the new high priority story by descoping some low priority story in this particular case, because you are actually above this line. And you need to keep in mind that remaining time for the sprint, if this happens at the end of the sprint, we should suggest to ask your product owner to wait for 2-3 days, then we can start working on, because you are about to close the sprint. And available bandwidth for the skills to accommodate the new story. If you are actually de-scoping a story by thinking I will be accommodate this new story, just remember what are the stories that you are de-scoping, the skill set required for that, and what the skill set is required for this particular story that you are adding. So those are the different cases you can actually think about, but your primary focus at the Burndown chart at the very first point, should we be concerned or not concerned. Now in this case, even it looks good, but we'll say okay, it's actually close to end of the sprint, and most of the committed stories might have already started working on, few of them in development in progress, few of them testing in progress. So adding a new story, you will not get a chance to de-scoping another. It will be create a spike here that will cause a losing of completion of all these stories. So here we always suggest product owner to wait for 2-3 days. We will be starting a new sprint after 3 days. We can take this story on high priority and complete it first. So that way you can actually work on it. Now we'll talk about the another scenario. One of your resource needs to go on a sick leave for a medical emergency for a couple of days. You already have committed. This is the case. I don't think here you will be having much problem, because if your one resource is going on sick, someone on the same skill set can able to accommodate. Your Burndown is pretty close to the bottom line, and you will be able to accommodate by doing some extra work, even some other resources gone on leave. So this is a good case. The team accommodate the unplanned vacation and check skill level, available bandwidth. So what is the skill level of the person is going on leave, and the available resource bandwidth on the same skill level. Now if this is the case, so this is actually not a very good case or good scenario for the team who is having someone absent or going for an emergency sick leave. So if the team feels there are potential chances of not completing the committed stories, then the team should immediately inform product owner and reach to a conclusion, like identify less priority story to start last thing of the sprint. So that kind of thing. So you can consult with your PO and the business owner whom you are interacting with, or the business analyst, and take a decisions, update them in advance so that this is what is coming, and we need to take a decisions for smooth delivery for the high priority user stories. Now we'll talk about the scenario 3. So the scenario is during second week of sprint, testing team raised too many bugs. That's very much possible, though it's not a very good practice. If the testing team is creating too many bugs, that means the developer is not doing a unit testing properly, or they are not verifying their own development based on whatever the acceptance criteria is written. But if that happens, what you will be doing? So you will definitely see, first of all, you check your definition of done about defect closure. So if your definition of done says okay, all P1 and P2 bugs must close within a sprint, and 3 and P4 can, so P1, P2 is priority. So check your definition of done for your priority and severity, and if you can see how you will be managing your priority of bugs. If it says I can close my story without closing my defect, that's not an ideal case, but based on your definition of done, you can actually take a decision. And if it requires okay, I need to close all the bugs that is coming into, you will see a spike within your sprint. So if you're Burndown, you are creating those sprint defects. Each sprint defect needs some task hours, and those task hours is actually increasing your actual Burndown towards high, because as of now here it was having some 8 or 30 hours of work remaining, and after these bugs it becomes 40 hours something here. So there are other cases also. In this case you may be able to complete it because it's within your capacity line, but if it's happened like this, then consider talking with PO to act out on the worst case scenario, what will be the cases, and identify the most low priority story and most critical stories, recheck the bugs, what is expected, Now it's also depends on this is your learning. Maybe it's happened for your first sprint or second sprint. You can learn from here. Going on the next sprint, you can actually keep this in mind to follow your acceptance criteria. The developer needs to test it in details, and also make sure whatever the acceptance criteria in the story is there at the time of commitment or development, that doesn't get changed, because I saw many teams or many product owners, they change the acceptance criteria or requirement even the stories is committed, and those actually cause these kind of problems. So the number of defects you are seeing here, that's not a very ideal case, but it's not impossible. It's if the tester is raising bugs, it's actually good for the team, because if you are having a matrix called defect leakage, then you will be able to filter all those defects that product owner may be finding out, or the defects will be rises at the UAT time. So these are the three scenarios we talked about, where you can actually refer your Burndown to find out what's the best situation and what can be possible. Now we'll talk about the team performance from the Burndown chart and defined action items. We'll see how the Burndown chart is, and based on that we analyze it. We'll take action on. Sometimes we can take the action within the sprint, or we can take that's a lesson learned and we take the actions, or we'll change our practice of work from the upcoming sprints. So let's see, this is one of the situation where I can see a straight line is going on. So what can be the reasons for this? So there can be possible cause is team is not updating the remaining task hour on daily basis. The team has not created all the tasks, so not able to change the remaining hours. The task remaining was underestimated, so remaining hours are not changing. User stories are blocked by some impediments and those are not resolved, so team is unable to proceed. Environmental issue like development server not available or test server not available to do the coding, or test environment not accessible for testing. So these are the different possible causes can be. There can be many others. These are the most prominent cause for this kind of burndown, and what action you can actually take. So make sure each and every team member update the remaining hours of the task they are working on daily basis. So this is actually countering the first point. Then during tasking or the task breakdown of user story, don't take it lightly. Take your time to create and estimate task as accurate as possible. Try to resolve the impediments as soon as possible. If some stories are blocked, don't wait for the resolution. Start working on the other stories. If all the stories are blocked and that may take couple of days to resolve, inform your product owner and act accordingly. So don't wait for the resolution. Definitely you work for getting the resolution done, but don't stop the other stories that can be start working on. So start working on them before starting the sprint. Map all your dependencies, resolve the dependencies first, then commit the story. So that's why we need continuous grooming to have our backlog health more better. So at the time of grooming, you do your dependency mapping and resolve the dependencies before you commit the sprint. So grooming and backlog refinement is that's why very critical to avoid this kind of situation. Now resolve all environmental issue. Normally this is a very rare case, but that can also possible and you can get a burn down like this. We'll talk about a different situation where we can see a burn down is actually touching the ground much before what we have anticipated or the ideal line when our sprint is ending on day 10, but we are able to complete everything by day 7. Again, it's not very bad for the team, but there are improvement opportunities. There are opportunities that team can deliver more in this situation. So we'll learn what exactly the possible cause is. The team has worked aggressively, burned more hours per day as per the capacity. The team has committed less than the capacity, then the team has overestimated the task. So the team maybe have committed less than the capacity. So if they are actually having, let's say 100 hours of capacity, they have committed 50 hours, the ideal line will show starting from 50, but where they will be putting double hours than the ideal line. So that way they will be able to reach here early. And the team has overestimated the task. If the team you are estimating if you are overestimating your task, then you will be able to complete it earlier. Action points on this: if the team willingly work hard, it's good, but it's always better to have defined works of work to be done. Working extra hours every day may cause other negative effects. We'll not going deep into that. What is the negative effects you'll have if you work more than your planned hours or more than 8 hours or 9 hours. Plan your capacity based on the best optimized amount of work the team can perform. The team commit less than the capacity, that's if you have committed less than your capacity, that happen because of insufficient amount of requirement or your backlog readiness. The stories are not ready. Product owner may not have enough stories ready to commit at the time of planning. So work on frequent and regular grooming to have your backlog healthy, so that you can able to optimize, use your capacity, and you will not be able to face this issue. And always estimate fair, make it as accurate as possible. Don't estimate 5 hours for 2 hours of work. Estimate fair so that you will be able to optimize your capacity to deliver more. It's a self-organizing team. You are the best person to estimate, you are the best person to development. Next, we'll talk about there are certain spike. So if we already talked about this certain spike when we got too many bugs, but that can also possible of some other reasons. So change of scope, the product owner added 2 or 3 stories in between. So you actually have to have that control to not accepting much stories, but that can possible if PO may ask to add 1 or few stories. Or the team estimated for an example something 100 hours of work, and later they decided they need more work, and the day 4 they have added the remaining hours to, instead of going down, they have increased it upward. So you can actually change the remaining hours to more also. So in any ALM tool and in Agile framework also, you just need to update the remaining work. You don't need to think about the burndown or how it will be coming up. When you are working on just remaining amount of work, update it from yesterday to today based on your analysis realization. As of now the state is. So if all the teams decides, okay, no, we need to work more or we need to spend more time for this these stories, then you will be seeing a spike because the task hours is increasing. There can be other reasons. You have too many bugs, you got few more stories, few technical spikes you have added. There can be many reasons. How you can actually resolve it: mature up your sprint planning. So at the time of sprint planning, commit based on your capacity, have your backlog healthy so that product owner don't need to add stories once the sprint is started. So it once in a while it can be possible, but it should not be a trend. So from this kind of situation, you can discuss this on your retrospective meeting and talk about, okay, this is the situation we are facing from 2-3 sprints. We need to change our practice by improving our backlog health. And by doing that, you'll at the time of sprint planning, you will be having enough number of backlog items to commit to, and you will not be facing these issues by creating ad hoc user stories. And also do the task breakdown thoroughly. So if you are adding few tasks, many times the teams forget to add task, and they add task at the time during the sprint, and that's create the spike. So you can actually have your tasking at the time of sprint. Take your time on your sprint planning, analyze it, research it, whatever. You already have groomed the story, so you know what exactly needs to be done. So you just need to create the amount of tasks that will be, so when you are doing as a team, you know which team member will be working on and how much time it will take, and based on that you create the tasking. So normally what happen is there are 2 team member. One is highly experienced on that particular domain, another is a newcomers. So that highly experienced team member who needs 5 hours of work for one given story, he goes on a leave or a medical emergency. Another person who is new to the team or new to that particular domain or technology is the only person who can take up, and he needs 15 hours of work to do that, because those are having 2 different technical level. Those the domain knowledge is also not parallel. So in those are the different situations what it happens. So it always better to keep some focus factor when you are doing your capacity planning. And if you actually want to know about capacity planning, there is another video on capacity planning, you can refer that, and that way you will be able to get rid of that, because in this particular situation it seems we'll be losing some of the stories that will hit your commitment reliability when you will be having the matrix calculated for all the team. There is one more situation. It's perfectly coming up good, but you see there is a lots of gaps between capacity line and the commitment line. So the team has capacity of 200 hours for an example, but their available stories is not that much to complete that capacity. So you will be able to definitely reach the ground very fast, because they are using the full 100% capacity, but ideally they have committed this much of amount of work of stories. So again, continuous backlog grooming is very important to get rid of this kind of situation, and understand the requirement in details, covering all aspects, then only commit the user stories. During sprint planning, what you need to do is so you need to mature up your sprint planning, utilize your full capacity, do the task breakdown properly, assign to the individuals, and then plan it. This case, you can see we are actually having this actual line much above the capacity line. We are close to the sprint end date, and every day this difference is increasing. So the difference from the actual line and capacity line at day 4 is this much, at day 6 this difference is this much, day 7 the difference is this much, and day 8, so the differences keep on increasing. So definitely there is something wrong happening. So possible cause, even the team is working as expected, but they are not updating the remaining hours. So that is the most of the cases I saw. They are working very hard. It may not be the actual case, but they are not updating the remaining hours on Excel or the ALM tools, which is actually not populating in the burndown. So if you think you will not be updating, then don't refer your burndown. If you think you are very much utilizing the burndown and getting the benefit of burndown chart, update your remaining hours regularly. The team is actually not working, that can one of the possible, that they got stuck or they have some other things in play, they are not working, so the burndown is like this. The team is blocked or impeded because of some stories. They are unable to work on a couple of stories, and those stories are not touched. The remaining hours remain same. So if you see the actual hours here and here is actually not much, this area I am talking about. So something is going wrong. The team has found estimated task hours are too low, need to work more, and so what they are doing is, instead of re-estimating, they are not updating, because they are in impression once the remaining hours will be come to the actual remaining hours they think, then they will start updating. So what I am saying is, they estimated, let's say 20 hours for one task, and later they realize it's actually 40 hours of work. So what they are doing, they are not re-estimating to 40 hours, they are working and waiting when they will be actually reach to real 20 hours of work remaining, maybe after 3-4 days, and then they will start burning down. That's also a wrong practice. In that cases, just re-update your remaining hours. At that point of time you realize it will show a spike, but you will get the real picture. Here we are not getting the real picture why it is going down. So please update the remaining hours every day. It may bring some spike, but it will depict the real picture. Rest of the cases, resolution varies from team to team. Analyze it and take the best suited corrective action. Here, this is interesting. This is something a straight line you may saw somewhere in Jira. Imagine this is, instead of hours, these are the story points for an example. And these story points, if you actually work on story points, all these stories will not be able to complete on the day 1. So one story got completed on day 2, accepted by your product owner, and then it's completed here. So story points doesn't completed on hourly basis or daily basis. If you see, mostly occurs when the team use story points as y-axis. Remaining work updates are not happening regularly. So again, also even they are working on hours, but they are not updating regularly the remaining hours. They are updating after 2 days or 3 days. You will getting this zigzag sign, and then remaining work updates happens only on last day of the sprint as a formality. So many teams they don't update it on daily basis. For formality they update on the last day. So you'll see how that looks like. So we'll show that. So this is how it will be look like if you update it on the last date, right? So this is one of the Burndown chart for the same reason, and this is one of the Burndown chart for the same reason. And then action points: start, task breakdown, and have the y-axis of your burndown with task hours. If you really want to get the benefit of burndown, use it on hours. And update the remaining hours on daily basis. Don't wait for the last date. Then that is the way. So you can discuss, if you see this kind of burndown on your burndown, discuss this on your retrospective, take an appropriate action items, follow the retrospective action items and work on that. You will definitely able to get a better burndown. And so burndown is actually to track your remaining hours. Here if you refer your burndown, you will not be able to get anything. Now finally we'll talk about why I don't prefer using a story point as a y-axis, and there are some disadvantages. So let's see what are the disadvantages. If you are actually working on a burndown within hours, you can see actually every day whatever the ideal, this green block is for the ideal line, and your actual line, this blue one, is actually going parallel to the most of the cases, or most of the positive cases I will rather say, is having an ideal line and the actual line like this. But if you are actually working on story points, then you will not be able to see. So in case of story point, it's not necessary every day one story will get completed. Even the team is already worked on it and burned some hours. So in case of story points, its story points will be whether done or not done. It will not burn like from 5 story points to 3 story points to 2 story point. It will not come like that. It will be not completed or completed. So it will be completed based on the total 5 points. So until the entire work is not finished, if one story of 8 story point need the entire team's 3 days of effort, that stories will be remain on the same line for 3 days. Once it is completed, along with product owner verified and accepted, moved it to done, then it will be come down. So it's also depends upon product owner. So if you look into this chart, it's actually on a story point where I have actually remaining story points at the day 1 is 30, that's actual. So ideal will be showing based on 27, 24, this is your ideally, but real life it will not possible, because first 3 days it's remain on 30, one story point or 2 story points get accepted, so we have 25 continuously, then something burned down, it's 18 again. So this way it will go, where in hours it's actually coming in a actual hours of work the team had spent on based on the remaining hours every day they think. So even 30 story pointers of 5 stories having 30 story points, it's almost done. 1 hour's work may be remaining, but until it's not accepted, it will not come down. It will be remain on that 30 line. And that's where you will actually see a sudden down and then straight line, sudden down and straight line. If you are using a story points, it will not give you a real amount of work remaining for the team. So there is another example here. So you can see a burndown chart like this if you are using story points. So what we actually need is we need a real tracking information as of now, how much work is pending or remaining at that point of time, whether we are on track, if it is in the ideal line or within capacity line, or we are risky. I don't think I will be able to get any kind of benefit from this burndown chart if you are doing it on story point. That will be all for today. Hope you like this video. If you like this video, please subscribe to our channel and give a thumbs up. Thanks for watching. We'll see you once again on our next video. Bye bye.